My name is Jordan. I'm the Director of Engineering here at Panther. Been in the industry for about 15 years at this point, managing different engineering, security, and operations teams at both small and large companies, ranging from Facebook, Airbnb, to Red Canary. The concept of build versus buy is something that I've dealt with a lot in my past. So excited to chat with Jan today on this topic in relation to SIEMs or SIMs.
Thanks, Jorn. So my name is Jan Urbans. I'm a Director of Security Operations here at GitLab, and I've been with the company for the past 3 years. I spent the past 7 years, I believe, working in security, an additional 15 or so before that in system operations roles at companies of different sizes, ranging from startups to multinationals. My org as GitLab consists of security teams whose business responsibilities have operational elements, if you want, or aspects in their work. Right now, those teams are the CERT, which is the incident response team, the proverbial blue team, the trust and safety team, which is responsible for abuse operations, red team, and infrastructure security team. I am located in a tiny European country of Slovenia. We're living in a tiny cottage in a tiny community. And this is my terrace. If it gets, I hope it doesn't get too dark. If it gets too dark, I will turn the light on. But yeah, that's about it for me.
Cool. Thanks, Jan. So for today's agenda, this is going to be pretty conversational. So we'll go back and forth between Jan and myself. So hopefully it's insightful. A lot of this is based off of firsthand experience through Jan's journey and his team at GitLab and myself. So we'll be diving into challenges that I'm sure some of you are facing. Starting with SIM, a lot of us are in the cloud now. It's a lot of data. We also probably have dozens of SaaS services that we're trying to secure and reason about. So I think with multi-cloud, multiple cloud accounts, SaaS services, et cetera, there's some big data problems and other challenges that we'll discuss today. We'll discuss GitLab's journey in building a SIEM or a SIM, and then some topics around build versus buy. Sometimes it makes sense to do one versus the other. Sometimes it's hard to choose. So we'll go through some of the specific nuances when it comes to choosing what you're going to do for a SIM or a SIEM. Jan's going to give us an introduction for what GitLab is, what they do, and how they service their customers.
Yeah, thanks. So GitLab is an open source DevOps platform that's delivered as a single application. It allows development, security, and ops teams to collaborate, build, and deploy software. GitLab allows organizations to improve cycle time from weeks to mere minutes sometimes, reduce development costs and increase productivity as well. Being open source, anyone can contribute to the code base of GitLab, and anyone can download and run the software on their own infrastructure. But we're also running the same product, same code base that people can download and run themselves on GitLab.com at scale. So basically, the same code that powers our SaaS is the one that millions can download, and a good subset of them use our SaaS as well every day. So the idea for GitLab started back in 2011, I believe, but the project was officially incorporated in 2014. Right now, the company consists of about 1,300 people, and we're located in 65 countries. We are a totally remote company, and before, prior to the global pandemic, GitLab was the world's largest all remote company. As I mentioned before, I'm responsible for a number of security teams that have an ops angle to their work, which ultimately means that all of these teams have or had a vested interest in a centralized data aggregation system that they can either contribute to or rely on for their day-to-day work. I can say that our search for the right team has been, vested interest of all the teams that have been or are still reporting to me. Yeah.
Cool. I think some interesting notes there. If nothing else outside of kind of technical learnings from this webinar, GitLab is very transparent about the things that they do. Engineering levels are available on the internet, how they think about performance, how they think about engineering. So if you also want to take some learnings outside of technical learnings from this talk and go think about how, or learn about how they manage people and otherwise, there's lots of great things there. But I think as Jan was highlighting, a lot of companies are remote. How you think about your perimeter changes, the different tools and applications that your team are using has changed, how people access that has changed. And so if your company is transitioning to a remote, considering remote, and you might have engineers all across the world or considering it, I think thinking about your SIEM or your SIEM is how can you support all these different teams, right? Some are more engineering centric, some are operational, some are otherwise. So I think some good thoughts to have during this conversation. So we have this slide titled as Old-Fashioned Approach to Security, lots of visuals in this slide, but I think this is really where we're going to start to dive into some of the pain points that companies are feeling when trying to build or buy a SIEM. I think the first one is really centered around big data or data explosion. We were kind of hinting at this a little bit earlier, but a lot of customers or companies have multiple AWS accounts, not a single one. If you reason about the data volume of just CloudTrail alone, some products screech to a halt, and you have to start thinking about how do you horizontally scale? How do you get that data in? Jan, I'm not sure if you have any data points here on how much data has exploded as your business has grown, or as the number of applications, services, and clouds that you're using has expanded.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned multiple AWS accounts. Well, that's just, that's the kind of a drop into the ocean. You have to start, asking the questions, multiple cloud providers, multiple accounts, and multiple cloud providers. As an example, with GitLab, we have migrated cloud providers 4 times up until now. And we still have, residual infrastructure in each of those environments. So, how do you handle it? How do you monitor for that? And even outside of strict, so to say, cloud provider logs, if you have a SaaS or a platform or an offering or a service that is popular, that is being that is on a hyper growth trajectory, if you want, the amount of logs generated by that SaaS, by that application, is going to skyrocket as well. And as this thing grows, so does your organization, your company, and so does the need to use more third-party services to rely on to run your business, which means additional logs, which means, and as you grow, you would then end up obviously spinning up your own infrastructure, because for some of the solution that you're looking to have or you have business needs for, you will build it and deploy it yourself, which means that you will be creating this kind of peripheral infrastructure that your business is going to rely on, that is not part of your main service, but it's business critical regardless, right? So that means additional logs. Add to that, the whole endpoint aspect to it, it becomes a mess pretty quick.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. Even pre-cloud and pre-data explosion, if you think of the typical SIEM or SIEM meme of like step 1, get all the data in, step 2, question mark, step 3, profit. Most people were never getting to step 3. Now step 3 is even harder given the data volumes and the 80 disparate sources that you're trying to onboard. Whereas before, people had the same hit list of Active Directory, this, that, or the other, and some of these aren't even relevant anymore. And now you've got 28 other ones. So I think that kind of goes into flexibility of how easy is it to get data in. How much work do you have to do to make that data operational? Do you have to think about indexing? Do you have to think about these different things? And then there's the trade-offs of, do you have the team to support that? What level of work is on you versus the vendor provider itself? And then lastly, scale. And when you think about scale, there's 2 components here. Does the cost scale with your business? And then does the actual software scale with your business? Can it take that data? And I think, Jan, I think you can probably speak to this, but I don't know someone who's not been in this business that hasn't had to have those conversations of what data can we cut because of the cost or because of the scale. Yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely. That is so true. And you know, many of the things that you have mentioned hit very close to home. I would say that, you know, as the cloud has become the go-to destination for running infrastructure, for spinning up services and so forth. So has become the reliance on third-party vendors. You mentioned something like 80 third-party vendors. Oh, we're nowhere near that number at GitLab. We're talking probably close to 300, right? So that means 300 additional data sources or third-party vendors that you're basically placing your trust in, and you're hoping that they will do their due diligence in order to secure all this data, the data that you're providing to them, right? But you know, you want to trust but verify. So that's one aspect of why you want to ingest those logs. The other part is that you want to retain some sort of monitoring on what is going on those systems, what your users are doing. Is there, you know, any anomalous activity taking place? This used to be much easier when you had the proverbial, you know, corporate LAN network with the infrastructure living in the basement, and you had like the payment and HR systems dwelling there, and they were pretty much contained, right? But what we have seen, and even more so over the past year, is companies going remote. And when companies started going remote, so does the it nullifies the notion of the perimeter, the traditional perimeter, right? It's that thing is dated, it's dead. It doesn't apply to the modern, you know, world of security. Like, security has changed dramatically over this past 10 or so years, and everything can be targeted nowadays. So, you know, by deciding that you will be, you know, in order to reduce costs, you're trying to ingest only the most valuable or most obvious data sources while neglecting the peripheral ones. But when you have an investigation, when you have a major incident taking place, those peripherals are likely going to be answering so many questions that the rest of the infrastructure is not going to, you know, to be able to provide, right? So, yeah, it's challenging. It's very challenging. And you know, another aspect of, you know, growing and trying to stay on top of data sources for a company like GitLab, we use GitLab for everything, right? It's our main tool to communicate and track, to communicate with other teams, other divisions, and to track our work. So what that means is that it's introducing another layer of complexity, because the SaaS logs that we generally would attribute to customers only are actually being used, or they contain information about corporate activity as well. So you cannot start cutting down those logs at all, no matter how big they become, because they ultimately contain the truth on what's going on or what went on at a specific point in time. Yeah, it's very challenging. And you know, when we talk about security being changed, I think the whole SOC paradigm is dead. I mean, you can scale security by putting more bumps on seats. That was the case, you know, in the past when you can do that. That's not the case anymore. If you're dealing with you know, with trivial events or alerts, you need to automate them. It's that simple. If an event doesn't require human judgment to be processed, then why is a human looking at them? It's you know, you have to be smart about using the scarce resources they have, and that applies to companies or organizations, both big and small. That makes no difference, right?
yep, that dovetails nicely kind of into this next section where we talk a little bit about Panther as a product and kind of your exploration and trying to build this yourself and kind of where you landed. And so I think with Panther, just as some context, as Jan starts walking through their journey, our product is cloud native. It's really both a product and a platform. It has value on day one, where we'll alert on things like open S3 buckets, things for source code repositories and things like that. And then the unique ability to write detections as code. I think we've seen this transformation in infrastructure as code. where button clicking in AWS consoles was deemed really bad for consistency, reliability, testing, and everything else. And it's time to see that transformation in security, where you can write any language that you do every day, Python or SQL, test that, and collaborate through Git-based workflows. So I think if we go to the next slide, Jan will walk us through kind of some of the challenges they had before they used Panther.
Yeah, happy to share our journey thus far. So we identified a need for a single source of truth, a single data aggregation platform, if you want, where we would be able to funnel, to siphon all these data sources that were of interest to us, and then create alerts. Right? We had a couple of requirements. We want this to be scalable. Because the number of data sources that we were planning on ingesting was likely going to be exceeded by a multitude in a year or a couple of years' time. We wanted it to be flexible. We wanted the platform to be able to ingest anything that we throw at it, and then execute queries. We wanted something that was cost-effective, that was approachable for a company of our size at that time. That was in 2019 or so. So we started looking at what was available in the SIEM market around the time, and unfortunately there wasn't really a good option for us to choose from. The existing SIEMs at that point in time were either too costly or too kind of traditional. I don't know if tradition is the right word, but maybe too stiff, monolithic, non-flexible. So we did what every good engineering team decides to do. We were like, yeah, well, we're going to build our own. Like every student back in the day used to build a CMS of their own. We decided to build a SIEM of our own. So there were a couple of problems that we wanted to solve to begin with, right? We wanted, as I mentioned, we wanted to ingest as many different data sources, like SaaS logs, cloud provider logs, infrastructure logs, security monitoring tool logs, critical third-party SaaSes that we were relying on, and peripheral third-party SaaS logs as well. We wanted to be able to quickly create new alerts for events of interest. We wanted to be able to perform cross data queries, cross data source queries, and correlate data. And we wanted to basically be able to have more just in a few weeks of data available outside of cold storage. So it was a retention reasoning behind it as well. So we decided to embark on this journey. Starting was exciting, of course. We assigned 2 engineers to this task. We focused initially on just a couple of data sources and a couple of specific alerts. It was great because solving engineering tasks is exciting. That was in early 2019, I believe, or so. We launched the service into a production type of capacity about 5 months later, 6 months later. It was the summer of 2019, and things looked good. And then 3 months later, problems emerged. There were availability issues because our solution was based on the Elk stack. So we had availability issue. The thing just kept tripping over for this or that reason. The more data sources we threw at it, the more tripping over we were experiencing. The requests from their security teams, the requests for new alerts skyrocketed, obviously, because that thing was delivering. It was working, right? We were getting alerts. It was exciting, but the alerts skyrocketed to a point that it was very hard to distinguish signal from noise. There was no deduplication of alerts. There was no way to set priorities. We tried different approaches, and they were all cumbersome, or duct tape and what do you call it, shoestring solutions, not very optimal, and they didn't scale. They didn't perform well. pushing new detections, new alerts became problematic, as there was no real way to do change management, to track changes. And we ultimately encountered or stumbled into data retention problems, right? We played with multiple ideas on how to solve this, like, send a specific or logs after a specific amount of time into cold storage for, and then spin up on demand replicas of this elk stack to just ingest that data, but that didn't work too well. So what the end result was that whenever we had a real investigation going, we had to fall back to using GCP's BigQuery to load the logs and query the logs. And BigQuery is expensive, right? Every execution of a search across different a multitude of data is translates to money wasted. Now, if you have to repeat a query multiple times, that's it's not great. So we effectively lost several months, or what was, I would say, several weeks of engineering time every month just to ensure that the thing was up and running. And even when that was the case, there were problems, right? So that was at the 3-month mark. 6 months in, that was around New Year of 2020, yeah. We started considering a third-party solution of some sort, because this was not scalable. And you work with stuff that doesn't scale or has problems scaling before. You know how difficult this can be, and it's even harder when this is the one source of truth that your whole department is relying on to ensure the security of not just the platform, but also the company itself, right? Yeah, I think along came Panther at the right point in time, and it was exactly what we were trying to build, but it was done right. So yeah, we embarked on a month-long proof of value with Panther, and kind of solidified our belief that this is the right tool, the right solution for us.
Cool, that's useful context. I think what's always interesting is we often, I've done this, at a number of companies where you explore available solutions. They might not be flexible enough. You have that hard decision of whether you're going to build it or not. And I think what often gets lost is there's the time to build it to a point of viability, and there's the time to maintain it for years to come. And I think a lot of us have joined companies as an engineer, a cert person, manager, director, whatever it is. And then you find the thing that was built 3 or 4 years ago, those people don't exist at the company anymore.
Yep.
And then the velocity actually matches or aligns towards what you'd expect from a vendor. Hey, we got to spend 70% of our time keeping the lights on, scaling it, meeting internal customers' needs for what they want to onboard, and all the control that you had hoped for of, oh, we're going to spend all of our time getting value. You're spending time maintaining a product effectively. And so I think that always has to go into the equation of, are we uniquely positioned to do this? And if we have to do it, are we going to continue to sustain this thing over time, or is it going to slowly fall apart? And so it's how fast you want to get to outcomes and how much flexibility you need. So I think it's, I've lived on both sides of the coin. There was times where it made sense that we built it, and it felt great. And there's other times where it didn't feel great. It was not a great idea, and we should have just written the check. So.
Yeah. You have to spend your resources wisely. The engineer in us always wants to go ahead and build that because we can build it better than company X or whatever. But that rarely works out as planned. So if I were to summarize where we are right now at this point in time, with Panther, we're currently ingesting between 2 and 5 terabytes of data daily. The biggest chunk of this volume comes from GitLab.com SaaS logs. Because of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, we use this as our kind of platform to do any project type of work, engage other teams and so forth, which adds a lot to the existing logs of other customers. We're ingesting cloud infrastructure logs from GCP and AWS, and we're currently expanding to the other providers that we use. We are ingesting our single sign-on logs, Google Workspace audit logs to determine if we are oversharing some information. You mentioned earlier, GitLab is a very transparent company. Yes, we are. Like, transparency is one of our core values, which makes it very challenging often from a security standpoint. Like, everything's out there, everything's public by default, right? So we need to keep a close eye on what is being shared via Google Workspaces with the wider world. And that generates a lot of alerts and many logs, I have to say. And we're also ingesting endpoint logs, both the endpoint management system, which is we're currently using Jamf, and Sentinel-1, which is our EDR, and we are ingesting critical third-party SaaS logs. Well, at least the SaaS that we identified as being business critical to the to the operation of GitLab. What we are doing with Panther is that we are actually using GitLab as the code repo for Panther alerts, because all alerts are in code, and this is one of the the nicest aspects of Panther is every alert is a chunk of Python code that you can write and then ingest into something like a Git repo, and then we use GitLab's CI/CD pipelines to test and deploy these rules to Panther. We're using GitLab.com to track incidents as opposed to using the case management system functionality that's provided in Panther. We do this because we have a strong dogfooding culture. We want to try to use GitLab for as many business purposes as we can, and so far it's been working out really well for us. I mentioned wasting or having wasted many engineering cycles on the upkeep of our homegrown SIEM and everything around that. Those cycles are now being spent on other more useful projects or aspects of the business, like improving the log ingestion infrastructure, which is cross-cloud. This is something that Panther doesn't solve for you as an organization, right? You still need to come up with a way to move those logs from the data source to Panther. It has proven, it's an engineering task that sounds easier than it actually is, especially if you have a hybrid or multi-cloud environment and you want to be cost effective, because movement network traffic between cloud providers can be a bit costly when you're dealing with large volumes of data. So we're dedicating a lot of effort to that type of optimization of that part of the log ingestion pipeline. Also improving the quality of alerts, expanding the number and identifying new data sources that we want to ingest into Panther, and then ultimately automating response for common or known events via a source solution of our choice, which is currently Times. Our search for the right source for us is very similar to our search for the right SIEM for us. We have gone full circle, and then we ended up with Times just recently, and we are super happy about it.
Just to quickly interject here, I think for those that are on the call, when you look at this slide, these technologies or primitives or ways of doing things, it should be looking familiar. I think a lot of companies are moving towards engineering-centric workflows because there's lots of guarantees that you can get with this. And so if you're looking at kind of the CI/CD component and things like that, by writing your detections in Python, you can test them, right? You can test them that the true positives are occurring, the false positives are staying away, and you can effectively collaborate as a team, right? I think, writing in a custom DSL and a UI and clicking save, and then someone else might come along and edit that custom DSL Did they do it
Been there.
right? Did they do it wrong? What was the last revision? If you need to revert or roll back, did someone review the change? Did it look right? Can you leverage your peers' insights and intelligence? And so I think being able to leverage the things that we're getting more and more used to doing as security engineers or otherwise, CI/CD, Git-based workflows, peer reviews on merge requests or pull requests, using data primitives or things like S3 and otherwise, it's more cohesive and it aligns more to what the rest of the entire engineering organization is doing. And I think that helps keep it as a sustainable thing versus as a, oh, who's the person who understands this proprietary way of doing things? And where's John or where's Sally that can help me understand how this works? It's like, no, we use CI/CD, we use Git, we use all these different things. And I think that's really the nice thing about having a platform is, at Panther, we're not super prescriptive in how we use it, right? So like Jan and team want to use GitLab for case management. Others might want to use DUI. Others might want to use Jira. And so we're not forcing you to kind of live in a particular ecosystem. We align towards your workflows that you're using or the tools that you're using. So I think it's useful, and I think it helps work together with the rest of engineering or the rest of IT or the rest of security who are surely using GitLab repositories or otherwise for other projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're talking about flexibility or being able to adapt the platform to whatever use case you need or the business needs, something that I thought was pretty cool and interesting that happened recently is that other departments started relying on the data that we're ingesting in Panther. They don't have that. They don't have access to it themselves. So there's always a proxy or a process they need to follow. But right now we have we had various people or teams in the legal and compliance and IT departments relying on the data that we're ingesting in Panther. But I guess this is kind of a side effect of us approaching log ingestion or data ingestion from a more maybe out of the box security perspective. If you go down a very niche path when you want to only throw strictly security related stuff at Panther, that's totally fine. We decided to expand that scope a bit, and it has proven to be fruitful to other parts of the business as well. So yeah. Yeah.
It's really interesting, I think, and it's a point worth pressing. I think a lot of teams or companies, just based off of how it was positioned in the market a decade ago or otherwise, there's this notion that a SIEM or a SIM is to react. You get all your data in there, and then if something bad happens, you can go ask questions. Lots of teams now are using it for proactive purposes. Like we have one customer that used it to understand SSH patterns to reduce the amount of SSH access and to work towards killing it entirely. Another customer of ours used it to understand access patterns for Okta. They wanted to know how many had SMS versus WebAuthn or U2F. And so by using that data, not only did they know the composition of how many Android, how many iPhone, can it support the new standards, and they worked towards an entire WebAuthn U2F model where their ability or their susceptibility to phishing dropped dramatically. So there's value proposition in getting the data in besides just incident response and intrusion detection. It's how do you improve the security posture of your company, but also, as you highlight, understanding trends and patterns of like who's using what applications. Do we need to buy more licenses? Do we IT can use it, compliance can use it, different teams can use it. And I think we're getting more to this world where companies have a data lake or data warehouse that empowers every organization, right? And so I think security moving more towards that model and understanding that data empowers you to make decisions, proactive, reactive, or otherwise, is crucial to having a voice in a business and saying, this is how we mitigate risk, this is how we enable the business, this is how we pare down risk with vendors or otherwise, or whatever it is.
Yeah, Definitely. And, it's one of our, it's not a formal prerequisite, but it's as soon as a tool that we develop ourselves reaches a level of maturity when we're really starting to trust its findings, so the accuracy is very high, then we will ask the team to start shipping those logs to Panther. As an example, our red team has been formidable, and they have built so many tools that scan our IP space for anything of interest. And these are homegrown tools, right? And the logs of those tools all end up in Panther, so that the cert can respond. And we are working on automating the reach out to the people that are responsible, or they're the owners of those bits of infrastructure, to circumvent the load on the cert engineers to begin. Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. So I think circling back to the theme, it was useful hearing your story, some of the pain points, some of the things that we alleviated for you. But when we go to build versus buy, I think that first kind of bucket right there is, who is in your team? How big is your team? And how do you think about scaling that over time? And how do you want those people allocated over time? I think when you build anything, whether it was like the team I worked with that built OS Query at Facebook or otherwise, like allocate at least 2 people to maintaining that over time. And are you willing to spend that 4 months to then start operationalizing it? Or do you want to fast forward? Like, what's your business need? What do you need to solve now? And what do you need to solve later? So I think that's the longevity component. And then I think, again, like, is your team in a position to support that over time? Elastic's an amazing product. Elk solves a ton of problems for a ton of people. But do you have the folks, and do you want the folks to think about sharding and horizontally scaling, and having to make those trade-offs around data volumes and otherwise? I'm not sure if there's anything that you wanted to add to kind of that area of focus.
Well, I would say this: if you build a system and you expose it to internal customers, and you're trying to be smart about it, you're trying to, as an example, build your own SIEM, and then you try ingesting all these additional data sources that ultimately end up as being important or business critical to other teams, other departments. If at any point in time you decide to sunset that system, chances are those other teams, departments, will have automation around this data source and will be relying on the uptime or the existence of this particular data storage. So you are unable to sunset something overnight, right? You are basically setting yourself up for failure to burn in the flames of legacy hell.
Yeah, there's a reason why serverless is getting popular, right? It's you want to focus on the outcome that you care about, which might be business logic or otherwise. You don't want to think about patching servers, scaling servers, and things like that. So I think like there's a reason why lots of products who are on-prem are now SaaS only. It's it fast forwards outcomes for customers. And as you point out, it's funny how we think of vendors when they have downtime, and you're like, why don't you have the 4 nines? But when we build our own things internally and we're held to those 4 nines, we're like, oh, hey, come on, give me a break. I've got 5 other things I'm working on. So it's a little bit challenging there. The second area, as you kind of point out, who are your stakeholders? Who needs to use it? And can it scale with your business? And I think this goes again back to like, how much data do you want to have to make those trade-offs of, do you cut the data because you can't pay that bill? Do you want to have to sit down and do multi-week arguments over what's the most meaningful data? If we think of our attack surface and who we are as a business and who our threat actors are and all these different things, like, so many companies spend more time thinking about that to decide what logs to get in versus just getting their logs in. And so I think moving towards a posture of get them all in, and hopefully, working with a company that can do that at a price point where, again, you're thinking about outcomes, not what can I cut. So I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that as well.
No, well, this was our one of the key elements or key reasons why we decided to build the SIEM ourselves, because the one option that was available at that time in the market, and it was providing the flexibility that we're looking for, was just if we cannot sign the check with those many numbers for a single year. It's not how it works, right? And we didn't want to compromise in terms of data sources that we would be willing to cut. So yeah, we learned a hard lesson there, but I'm glad that our paths have crossed with Panther, and we managed to get this strategic partnership going.
Cool. And I think that last bucket kind of aligns towards what we were just talking about, running at scale, keeping costs reasonable, and scaling with the business. There's nothing worse than having a tool that you loved as a Series A company, Series B, or even IPO, and then 1 year later, the pricing structure no longer works for your business because you were successful. That sucks and that hurts, right? You're like, well, because I was successful, I now, like as a company, have to go shopping for something else. Because the tiers or how the architecture works doesn't scale with your business. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I think this leads us to Q&A. So for those that are in Zoom, there's a little Q&A button on the bottom right. We'd love any questions that you have, either for myself or for Jan, technical or otherwise. So feel free to enter some questions there. Taking a look at the list that we're getting right now. First one is, in a build versus buy decision, how do you assess and quantify the operational costs and risks? That's a really interesting question. I think part of this is business or organization specific. If you think about how your team or organization is allocated CapEx or OpEx, can you sustainably support this over time? Can you get the resources you continue to need to feed it, right? Either from nurturing care from people or just the bill that comes with, scaling and adding more EC2 nodes. But also, as we know, like there's risk in going with a vendor, right? You have to trust that vendor's controls, their security team, how they manage and mitigate risk. We have things like SOC 2 and otherwise that try and create some transparency there, and understanding that if that partnership is created, do you trust that vendor? Can you work with them? And is it in as good as hands as it would have been internally or better? So I think quantification and qualification of risk is hard. It's an entire art and science within that. But I think localizing it a bit, think about the leadership team and those that are supporting you from a budget and people perspective. Think about the things that you're uniquely positioned to solve. Think about where your business and team is going in the next couple of years. And then just try and make decisions accordingly. I mean, as Jan highlighted, sometimes you make decisions, it works well for a short period of time, medium period of time, the business evolves, risks evolve. And so you just try and make decisions with the information that you have at your hands at that time. Jan, I'm not sure if you have any interesting insights on how you quantified or qualified risks as you either went open source first or decided to go, SaaS or with a vendor second.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Especially if you work in security, you have this racing, paranoid mind that reminds you of things going boom in the night all the time. So yeah, it's a difficult decision. I think you have to be pragmatic about it. There's risks involved in trusting a third-party vendor. There's always is, yes, but at some point you have to make a judgment call. And if what you have internally available, the resources that you have, do not suffice, then obviously you need to go with plan B, and that's likely going to be a third party.
Yep, so that's a great question. And a small plug for a former colleague of mine, Magoo, who used to work at Facebook, has some interesting blogs and articles on risk measurement, trying to make it more mathematical versus soft. So if you Google for that, you might find some interesting resources there, which are useful for vendor management, patch management, or thinking about things in this context. I think there's a question here for you, Jan. What would have had to have happened with your homegrown solution for you to have kept it?
I guess if we manage to retain, no. Well, this is, a bit me being maybe being too transparent, but to be honest, we missed a number of important security events because our system was down for one reason or another, and that was kind of the breaking point where we were just like, okay, we cannot do this, and we didn't have the resources, the human resources available at the time to dedicate to this project. We didn't burden our infrastructure team, who is responsible for running GitLab.com, with this additional, with this additional resource that they would have to then monitor and respond to. And we decided, as I mentioned, the stars have aligned and Panther came along at exactly the right time. Who knows what would have happened if that was not the case? Maybe we would have just, marched through it and developed inner competencies within the team, or maybe we would have outsourced it or hired more people. I don't know. But as it happened, Panther solved a number of problems for us.
Cool. Thanks for that. One question is, how does Panther work? Is it agent-based or agentless, inline or out of band? So Panther is similar in nature in terms of other SIEMs or SIEMs, in so much as it doesn't require an agent. Really, the intention is for you to get data in. We support S3 buckets and another, other sets of transport mechanisms. But if you have an agent deployed, like Jan highlighted, Sentinel-1, they're getting their data into Panther for that. Whether you're using OS Query, CrowdStrike, whatever it is, like there's means of getting data in. Most of these products support some means of exporting your data to something like S3 or otherwise. So Panther does not have a custom agent. So if you're using Logstash or Fluent, like something open source or something commercial that's targeted towards EDR or otherwise, you can get that data in, and it's out of band. It's not CASB style where if we go down, all of your things go down. So it's I guess asynchronous in that fashion. You have data pipelines that help you get the data in, so nothing would blow up or break. It's not like inspecting MTLS, for example, and then your entire network goes down because you goofed it. So that's a good question. And then we have a question from Brad to Jan. If you could go back and change only one thing in transitioning to Panther, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we probably would have asked for the CLI tool earlier. Because that tool basically allows you to verify alerts prior to them being pushed onto Panther. That has proven to be a life-saving mechanism that I think we learned about it too late, or maybe it wasn't developed at a time when we were doing the proof of value. But yeah, if we had the opportunity to do that again, I think that would expedite our migration of the alerts from our homegrown system to Panther quite a bit.
Cool. Thanks for that. Do we have any other questions?